The jungle pulsed with life beneath a violet sky, streaked with flickering auroras. Rilia crouched low in the undergrowth, her sharp eyes scanning the ground for signs of disturbance. The air, thick with the scent of damp moss and bioluminescent flowers, hummed with the usual chorus of chirping insects and distant growls from the predators that roamed the twilight hours. But tonight, something felt off. Her fingertips brushed against the soil, warm and sticky with residue that glowed faintly under her touch. It wasn't natural. This was something new, something wrong. The elders had always warned of omens, of anomalies that disrupted the harmony of Thalix Prime. They called them tears in the fabric of existence. Rilia had always dismissed such tales as fear-mongering, but now, staring at the scorch marks cutting through the jungle floor like jagged wounds, she wasn't so sure. Her hand instinctively tightened around her tracker's staff, the faint hum of its energy core a comforting presence. She glanced upward, where the forest canopy had been shattered in places, revealing glimpses of the alien sky. Blackened branches stretched like skeletal fingers toward the stars. Something had fallen here, something massive. And it wasn't the Luxian. Rilia moved cautiously, her footsteps muffled by the dense underbrush. The jungle seemed to hold its breath, the usual cacophony of life subdued, as if the world itself had paused to witness this moment. The path of destruction led her toward a clearing, the edges charred and steaming. The faint smell of burned metal and earth stung her nostrils. In the center of the clearing lay the object, a hulking, angular form of blackened steel and strange, reflective surfaces. It was unlike any Thaluxian craft she had ever seen, its design alien and disjointed, as though the universe had stitched it together from fragments of unrelated worlds. Rilia's heart pounded in her chest as she approached, her every instinct screaming to turn back. Yet curiosity pulled her forward, overriding the fear gnawing at the edges of her mind. She circled the object, noting the jagged gashes along its surface and the peculiar symbols etched into the metal. The glyphs seemed to writhe and shimmer under the faint bioluminescent glow of the jungle, as though alive and aware of her presence. A sudden hiss of steam erupted from the craft, and Rilia leapt back, her staff raised defensively. The noise echoed through the clearing, shattering the fragile stillness. For a moment, nothing moved. Then a panel on the side of the object shifted with a groan, sliding open to reveal darkness within. From that darkness came a sound, a low, guttural groan that sent a shiver down her spine. Rilia froze, her eyes locked on the opening as something stirred inside. A figure emerged, stumbling forward and collapsing to the ground with a heavy thud. It was a body, humanoid in shape, but entirely foreign. Broad shoulders, limbs long and muscular, clad in tattered fabric unlike anything she'd seen before. The figure's face was obscured, but the chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. Whoever, whatever, this was, it was alive. Rilia's instincts warred within her. The Elder's warnings echoed in her mind. Avoid the unknown. Do not invite chaos into our world. But the figure before her was vulnerable, unconscious, and utterly alien. Her curiosity flared, overpowering her caution. She stepped closer, the staff still held at the ready, and crouched beside the figure. The fabric covering its body was strange, coarse under her fingertips. Her gaze wandered across its form, studying the muscular structure, the odd proportions. Her breath caught when she noticed something unfamiliar, a feature of its anatomy that she couldn't identify. Her hand moved almost on its own, reaching to tug at the fabric obscuring this peculiar detail. The material gave way easily, revealing smooth, scarred skin beneath. Rilia's fingers brushed against the flesh, and she recoiled at the warmth radiating from it. Her species ran cool, their bodies adapted to the planet's temperate climate. This being was hot, alive in a way that seemed unnatural to her. Before she could examine further, the figure stirred. A low groan escaped its lips, and its head turned slightly. Rilia scrambled back, her heart racing as the being's eyes fluttered open. They locked onto her, pupils contracting in the dim light. "Where?" the being rasped, its voice deep and rough. The word was foreign, incomprehensible, but the tone carried a weight of confusion and fear. Relia raised her staff defensively, her mind racing. She was trained for survival, for navigating the dangers of Thalix Prime's jungles, but nothing in her training had prepared her for this. The being tried to push itself up, its movements sluggish and uncoordinated. It seemed disoriented, vulnerable, yet strangely imposing. Relia hesitated, torn between aiding it and fleeing back into the safety of the jungle. "What are you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The being looked at her, its expression unreadable. For a moment, there was only silence between them, the weight of the unknown pressing down like a physical force. Then it spoke again, a single word that Relia could not understand but felt resonate deep within her. The mystery loomed large, and with it, 1,000 unspoken questions. What was this creature? Where had it come from? And why, despite every warning she had ever been given, did she feel compelled to stay? The jungle remained silent, as if waiting for an answer that neither of them could provide. The clearing was a bubble of tension, suspended in the heart of the jungle. The unknown being stirred again, struggling to sit upright, its movements jerky and pained. Relia didn't dare move closer this time. She gripped her staff tighter, the faint hum of its energy core steady beneath her fingers. Yet, for all her defensive instincts, a flicker of something unfamiliar gnawed at her, a raw, untempered curiosity. The figure groaned softly, its head sagging forward. Its breathing, labored and uneven, filled the oppressive silence. In the violet glow of the jungle's ambient light, Relia studied it more closely, noting the intricate lines of its musculature, the way its form seemed simultaneously fragile and powerful. This was no Thaluxian, that much was clear. But what was it? The being's head lifted slightly, and its eyes, now half-lidded and glassy, locked onto hers once again. There was an intensity in that gaze, alien, unreadable, yet strangely evocative. It seemed to regard her with equal parts fear and bewilderment, as if it couldn't decide whether she was a threat or a savior. Rilia's mind churned with questions. What was this creature? How had it arrived here? And most pressing of all, what should she do now? The Thaluxian code was clear about encounters with the unknown. Observe, but do not interfere. Yet, as she watched the being slump back against the wreckage, its strength visibly fading, she knew she couldn't simply walk away. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly, more to herself than to the being. Her voice was barely a whisper, swallowed by the stillness of the jungle. The creature's lips moved, forming words she couldn't understand. Its tone was rough, strained, carrying an edge of desperation. It was trying to communicate. The realization sent a jolt through her, a confirmation that this was not just some mindless predator or unthinking automaton. This was someone. Relia hesitated, torn between her fear of the unknown and the undeniable pull of her instincts. Her people prided themselves on their isolation, their self-sufficiency, yet here she was, standing on the edge of something that could shatter the boundaries of her understanding. Finally, she stepped closer. Just a single step, but it felt monumental. "Can you understand me?" she asked cautiously. Her voice wavered, betraying her uncertainty. The being blinked slowly, its head tilting slightly as if trying to process her words. Then, with visible effort, it raised a hand, a gesture that seemed deliberate, purposeful. Its fingers curled weakly, pointing toward the scorched ground beside it. Relia followed its gesture and saw what it was trying to indicate, a small, cylindrical object, half buried in the dirt. It was unlike anything she'd ever seen before, its surface smooth and metallic, etched with the same strange glyphs as the craft. Carefully, she knelt and picked it up, turning it over in her hands. The object was surprisingly light, its surface warm to the touch. "What is this?" she murmured, her voice barely audible. The being's lips moved again, but no sound came out. Its strength was fading rapidly, and Rilia knew she had to act quickly if she was going to keep it alive. She glanced back at the jungle, the dense undergrowth that concealed her path back to the settlement. Her people would not welcome this creature. The elders would call for its destruction, deeming it a threat to their way of life. To bring it back would be to defy centuries of tradition and invite the wrath of the council. Yet to leave it here, helpless and dying, felt equally wrong. The being groaned again, a low, pained sound that sent a shiver down her spine. Rilia made her decision. She leaned forward and pressed her hand against the being's chest, feeling the rapid, uneven rhythm of its heartbeat. The warmth of its skin was startling, a stark contrast to the cool, tempered touch of her own kind. "I'll help you," she said softly, though the words felt heavy with uncertainty. With considerable effort, she managed to hoist the being into a sitting position. It was heavier than she had anticipated, its weight pressing against her as she struggled to keep it upright. The being's head lolled forward, resting briefly against her shoulder. The contact sent a strange, unfamiliar sensation coursing through her, a mix of discomfort and something she couldn't quite name. As she adjusted her grip, the being's hand brushed against hers. Its fingers were rough, calloused, yet they curled instinctively around her own, a gesture of trust, or perhaps desperation. Rilia's chest tightened, the enormity of what she was doing sinking in. The journey back to her dwelling was fraught with difficulty. The jungle, usually a familiar and welcoming environment, now felt hostile and oppressive. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow a potential threat. Rilia moved cautiously, her every sense on high alert. The being occasionally stirred, emitting faint groans of pain, but it made no attempt to resist her efforts. It seemed content to let her lead, its trust in her an unspoken acknowledgement of their shared predicament. By the time they reached her dwelling, a modest structure built into the hollow of an ancient tree, Rilia was drenched in sweat and trembling with exhaustion. She eased the being onto a low platform, her hands shaking as she tried to steady her breathing. The being's eyes flickered open briefly, meeting hers with a gaze that seemed to hold 1,000 unspoken questions. Rilia knelt beside it, unsure of what to say or do next. The weight of her decision pressed heavily on her, the knowledge that she had crossed a line she could never uncross. "You're not supposed to be here," she said again, her voice barely above a whisper. Yet, even as she spoke the words, she knew they weren't true. This being, whoever or whatever it was, had come to her world for a reason. And now, whether she liked it or not, her life was entangled with its fate. As she stared into its unreadable eyes, a single thought echoed in her mind, a question that would haunt her in the days to come. What have I done? The quiet hum of the biolights in Rilia's dwelling cast a soft amber glow over the room, illuminating the alien's still form. Its breathing was shallow, but steady, a fragile rhythm that Rilia had come to measure her own against. She sat cross-legged on the floor nearby, her hands resting against her knees, her thoughts spiraling in directions she could barely control. This creature, this man as the word had surfaced in her mind, was unlike anything she had encountered. The glyph-marked object it had gestured to earlier now sat on the low table before her. Its metallic surface seemed to pulse faintly under the light, as if alive in its own peculiar way. Rilia hadn't dared activate it. The risk of tampering with something so clearly alien was too great. Her gaze shifted back to the man, studying his strange form with a mix of fascination and trepidation. He was an enigma, every inch of him a question begging to be answered. The texture of his skin, the lines of his face, the peculiar strength of his frame, they were all so different. But it was his voice that lingered most in her mind, the rough syllables that had spilled from his lips like fragments of an ancient riddle. What had he been trying to tell her? The answer came suddenly, as if summoned by her thoughts. The man stirred, his fingers twitching against the woven fibers of the mat beneath him. His eyes opened, their brightness startling in the dim light, and for a moment he seemed disoriented, his gaze darting around the room. Then his eyes locked onto hers, and something shifted between them, an unspoken acknowledgement, a fragile connection. Where, Am I? He croaked, his voice hoarse but unmistakably clear. Rilia froze. The words were strange yet comprehensible, as if they bypassed the barriers of language entirely. She leaned forward, her heart pounding in her chest. You can speak? The man coughed, a dry, rasping sound that shook his frame. Not well, he managed, his tone carrying a trace of wry humor despite his obvious pain. Rilia's mind raced. Communication was a cornerstone of understanding, and yet the implications of this exchange were staggering. If he could speak, then he could answer her questions, if he survived long enough to do so. I don't know who you are, she said cautiously, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions churning within her. I don't know why you're here, but you're in danger. Do you understand? The man nodded weakly, his expression shifting to one of grim determination. Danger, he repeated. Not just me. You too. Rilia's breath caught in her throat. What do you mean? The man gestured feebly toward the cylindrical object on the table. That, he said. Beacon. The word sent a jolt through her. A beacon, a signal, something designed to call out to others, to draw them in. The implications were chilling. If this man's arrival had been accidental, then it was likely he wasn't alone, or worse, that others were already on their way. Who is coming? She asked, her voice edged with urgency. The man's expression darkened, his features hardening with a mix of fear and resolve. Not friends, he said. Not safe. Rilia's mind reeled. Her secluded world, untouched by outside forces for centuries, was suddenly at risk of exposure. The thought of others like this man, potentially hostile, armed with unknown technologies, was enough to make her stomach churn. She rose to her feet, pacing the room as her thoughts spiraled. The elders would call for immediate action, for the destruction of the beacon and the exile, or execution, of the man who had brought it here. But Rilia knew instinctively that such measures would only escalate the threat. Her gaze fell on the man again, his breathing labored, but steady. He had risked his life to warn her, to share what little information he could. There was a spark of integrity in his eyes, a flicker of something that resonated with her on a level she couldn't fully explain. What's your name? She asked, suddenly, the question slipping out before she could stop it. The man's lips twitched into a faint, weary smile. Derek, he said simply. Derek, she repeated, the unfamiliar syllables rolling off her tongue. I'm Rilia. He nodded, his expression softening. Rilia, he echoed. Then his gaze sharpened, his focus shifting to the beacon. If they come, we run. The simplicity of his words belied the gravity of their meaning. This was no longer about just him or her. This was about survival, about protecting her world from whatever forces might be drawn to the beacon's signal. Rilia crossed the room and picked up the cylindrical object, its smooth surface cool against her palm. If we run, she said quietly, where do we go? Derek's eyes closed briefly, as if the effort of thinking was almost too much for him. Away, he murmured. Far. Hide. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was a start. Rilia felt a surge of determination rising within her, a defiance that burned against the uncertainty of their situation. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to let this man, or her world, become a casualty of forces beyond their control. As she tucked the beacon into the folds of her garment, a faint, rhythmic vibration began to hum through the air. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but it grew steadily stronger, resonating through the walls of her dwelling like a distant drum beat. Derek's eyes snapped open, his expression sharp with alarm. They're coming, he said, his voice firm despite the weariness in his tone. Rilia felt a chill run down her spine. She didn't know who or what was out there, but she knew one thing for certain. The peaceful isolation of her world had just come to an end. The rhythmic vibration in the air intensified, resonating through the walls of Rilia's dwelling like an ominous heartbeat. Outside, the sky dimmed unnaturally, and a ripple of violet light streaked across the atmosphere, as if the heavens themselves were bearing witness to the impending danger. Derek struggled to sit up, his pale features set with grim determination despite his weakened state. Rilia hovered nearby, her hand clutching the beacon tightly, the cold metal pressing into her palm like a tether to reality. "We need to move," Derek said, his voice low but urgent. Rilia hesitated. "If we leave, we'll expose ourselves. The outer lands are treacherous, even for me. For you, in your condition." Derek cut her off with a sharp shake of his head. "Staying isn't an option," he said. "They'll find the signal. They'll find us." She knew he was right. The beacon was a thread that would pull whoever or whatever was coming directly to them. But leaving her home, her sanctuary, filled her with a deep sense of unease. This was her world, a place she had always known to be safe, untouched. Now, it was a battlefield waiting to ignite. "What happens if they find us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Derek met her gaze, his expression shadowed. "If they're who I think they are, you won't want to find out." The words sent a chill through her. She felt the weight of her choices pressing down on her, suffocating in their enormity. Minutes later, Rilia led Derek through the hidden passage at the back of her dwelling, a narrow tunnel carved into the hillside that opened onto the dense bioluminescent forest beyond. The air was thick with the hum of unseen creatures, their lights flickering like will-o'-the-wisps in the distance. Derek leaned heavily on her for support, his steps unsteady but determined. The beacon was tucked into a makeshift pouch at her side, its ominous glow muted but persistent. "What do they want?" Rilia asked as they pressed deeper into the forest, her voice barely audible over the rustling of leaves. Derek hesitated, his expression grim. "Control," he said finally. "Resources. Bodies. They take what they want and leave nothing behind." Rilia's stomach churned. She had heard tales of conquerors in ancient myths, but they had always felt distant, abstract. Now faced with the reality of such a force, she felt the fragility of her world keenly. "Why you?" she pressed. "Why here?" Derek glanced at her, his eyes shadowed with something she couldn't quite name, guilt perhaps or regret. "The crash wasn't an accident," he admitted. "I was trying to escape. I thought this planet was uncharted, hidden. I didn't think they'd follow me here." His words hit her like a physical blow. "You brought this on us," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and fear. "I didn't mean to," he said, his tone pleading. "I didn't know." Rilia turned away, her mind racing. She wanted to blame him, to rage at him for shattering the peace of her world. But she couldn't ignore the desperation in his voice, the vulnerability in his eyes. A sudden, piercing screech cut through the forest, freezing them both in their tracks. Rilia's heart pounded as she scanned the darkness, her sharp senses straining to pinpoint the source of the sound. "They're here," Derek said, his voice barely audible. Before she could respond, a burst of light erupted in the distance, illuminating the forest in stark, unnatural hues. Shadows flickered and danced, moving with unnatural precision. Rilia grabbed Derek's arm. "We have to keep moving," she said. They pushed forward, the terrain growing steeper and more treacherous. The sounds of pursuit grew louder behind them, mechanical whirs, guttural growls, and the crackle of energy weapons cutting through the foliage. Derek stumbled, nearly dragging them both down, but Rilia caught him, her strength and agility honed from years of navigating her planet's rugged landscapes. "Keep going," she urged, her voice firm despite the fear clawing at her. They emerged into a clearing, the open space bathed in the eerie glow of the planet's twin moons. Rilia's breath caught as she saw what lay ahead, a jagged chasm, its depths obscured by swirling mist. "There's no way across," Derek said, his voice tinged with despair. Rilia scanned the chasm's edge, her mind racing. Then her eyes landed on a series of vines, hanging from the towering trees on the opposite side. "There's a way," she said, determination hardening her tone. Derek followed her gaze, his expression skeptical. "You can't be serious." "Do you have a better idea?" she shot back. He didn't answer, and she took that as agreement. Rilia moved quickly, securing a vine and testing its strength. She turned to Derek, her expression resolute. "I'll go first," she said. "Follow as soon as you can." He nodded, his jaw set with determination despite the fear flickering in his eyes. Taking a deep breath, Rilia leapt, the vine carrying her weight as she swung across the chasm. For a moment she was suspended in the air, the ground far below lost in the swirling mist. Then she landed on the opposite side, her feet sliding on the loose soil but holding firm. She turned back, motioning for Derek to follow. He hesitated for only a moment before grabbing a vine and launching himself across. He landed awkwardly, collapsing to his knees, but he was safe. Rilia pulled him to his feet, just as the sounds of pursuit reached the edge of the clearing. "They're close," Derek said, his voice tight with urgency. Rilia nodded, her mind already calculating their next move. The mysteries surrounding Derek and the forces pursuing him were beginning to unravel, but they were far from safe. As they disappeared into the forest once more, Rilia couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was only just beginning, and that the sacrifices she would have to make were far greater than she had imagined. The clearing opened onto a desolate expanse of rocky outcroppings, the terrain scarred by ancient seismic shifts. The air was thick with static energy, crackling faintly as if the planet itself was holding its breath. Rilia and Derek stood on the precipice of the unknown, both worn down but far from defeated. Behind them, the forest shimmered with unnatural light, the pursuers closing in. Ahead lay the ruins of a long-abandoned Thaluxian outpost, its jagged architecture blending with the surrounding crags as though the land itself had swallowed it. "This is where it ends," Derek said, his voice a low murmur. Rilia glanced at him, her sharp features etched with both determination and unease. "Or begins," she said, the weight of her words hanging heavily in the charged air. They moved swiftly into the ruins, the remnants of her ancestors' advanced technology lying dormant and crumbling around them. Rilia felt a pang of reverence and loss. She had always been told that the Thaluxian builders had transcended their need for such places, leaving behind only echoes of their ingenuity. Now, standing among their remains, she questioned what her people had truly abandoned. In the central chamber, a towering obelisk pulsated faintly with a dim, violet light. It was a beacon, much like the one Derek had brought, but ancient and far more powerful. Its hum resonated deep within her, stirring memories she hadn't known existed, visions of a time when the Thaluxians had not been so alone. "What is this place?" Derek asked, his gaze fixed on the obelisk. "A memory," Rilia replied, her voice reverent, "a reminder of what we once were." Before either could say more, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the ruins. Shadows flickered across the walls, and a deep, mechanical voice broke the silence. "Human," it intoned. "Surrender the device." Derek's jaw tightened as he stepped forward, shielding Rilia with his body. "You'll have to come through me first," he said, his voice steady despite the tension in his posture. Rilia felt a surge of something she couldn't quite name, pride perhaps, or gratitude, but she knew Derek couldn't face their pursuers alone. The figures emerged into the chamber, their forms sleek and alien, their weapons humming with lethal energy. Rilia's heart pounded as she stepped forward, placing herself beside Derek. "You will not harm him," she said, her voice firm. One of the figures tilted its head, as though considering her. "You are Thaluxian," it said. "You should understand the consequences of defying us." Rilia squared her shoulders, drawing herself up to her full height. "I understand the consequences of inaction," she said. The figures hesitated, and in that moment, Rilia made her decision. She reached out, her hand pressing against the obelisk's surface. The violet light flared, and a wave of energy rippled outward. knocking the intruders off balance. Derek staggered back, shielding his eyes from the blinding light. "What are you doing?" he shouted. "Ending this," Relia replied, her voice steady. The obelisk's energy surged through her, connecting her to the ancient network of her ancestors. She saw visions of her people's past, their mistakes and triumphs, their decision to isolate themselves in the face of galactic conflict. And she saw their future, a path not yet written, but one that could be shaped by her choices. She turned to Derek, her expression softening. "You've shown me a world beyond my own," she said. "Now it's time I show my people the same." The light from the obelisk intensified, enveloping the chamber in a brilliant glow. When it subsided, the intruders were gone, their forms disintegrated by the energy. The ruins were silent once more, the air charged with a sense of finality. Derek approached Relia cautiously, his expression a mix of awe and concern. "Are you okay?" he asked. She nodded, though she felt changed in ways she couldn't yet articulate. "The beacon was more than a tool," she said. "It was a message, a call to reconnect with the galaxy." He studied her for a long moment before speaking. "What happens now?" Relia looked toward the horizon, where the first rays of dawn were breaking through the twilight. "Now, we rebuild," she said. "Together." In the days that followed, Relia and Derek worked to repair his ship, their partnership growing stronger with each passing moment. Derek shared stories of Earth, painting vivid pictures of its bustling cities and boundless oceans. Relia, in turn, shared her dreams of a future where her people would no longer be bound by fear and isolation. When the ship was finally ready, Derek turned to her, his expression both hopeful and hesitant. "You could come with me," he said. "See my world." Relia smiled, her gaze lingering on the sky. "I will," she said, "but not yet. My people need me." As Derek prepared to depart, Relia placed her hand over his. "You've given me more than you know," she said, "and one day I will return the favor." As his ship ascended into the heavens, Relia stood alone in the clearing, the light of the obelisk still glowing faintly behind her. For the first time she felt a sense of purpose, of connection, not just to her people, but to the vast and infinite universe beyond. Her journey had come full circle, but it was far from over. And as she turned toward the horizon, she felt the stirrings of hope, a hope that transcended the boundaries of species, of worlds, of all that she had once known. Kai Donovan had seen his fair share of dead planets. They were always the same, cold, barren, and void of life, with only the wind whispering through the jagged remnants of forgotten civilizations. But none had ever felt like this. There was something wrong about this one, something that twisted the air and clung to the atmosphere like an unseen presence. It was as if the planet itself held its breath, waiting for him to make his next move. He was stranded, his ship now a twisted wreckage on the surface of a world that had no name on any of the star charts. The coordinates he had punched into the navigation system had been off. Something had malfunctioned, or maybe it had just been his luck. His luck, after all, had never been something that could be trusted. He'd pushed it too far too many times, surviving close calls and dodging death more times than he cared to count. But this felt different. This felt like the kind of place where you didn't get a second chance. The planet was covered in jagged rock formations, some towering high above, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch forever across the gray, desolate landscape. No vegetation, no creatures scurrying in the dirt, no sky, just a thick, oppressive atmosphere that made breathing feel like dragging air through wet cloth. The silence was unbearable, and it gnawed at the edges of his mind, pulling his thoughts into the quiet void around him. Kai adjusted the collar of his flight jacket, trying to ward off a chill that was more than just temperature. It was something in the air, a tension that he couldn't explain. He surveyed the wreckage of his ship, or what was left of it. His pulse quickened as he realized the damage was far worse than he'd hoped. The hull was compromised, systems were offline, and with the atmospheric conditions, any attempt to repair it would take far longer than he could survive out here alone. His only hope was to find help, and fast. His feet crunched against the ground as he began to walk, heading toward the jagged ridge of rock in the distance, hoping to catch sight of something that might tell him where the hell he had landed. He kept his hand on his sidearm, but the weapon felt strangely inadequate in a place like this. The air here wasn't just cold, it felt wrong. As though there was something waiting, something that didn't belong, but couldn't be seen. And then, through the thick mist that had begun to settle over the valley, he saw it. A figure, tall, silent, standing on a high ledge, overlooking the expanse of broken earth. For a moment, Kai's heart stopped. It was a woman, at least he thought it was. Her silhouette was sharp against the gray backdrop, her posture perfectly still, like a statue. But the way she stood, the way she seemed to blend into the rocky surface, was unnerving. There was something alien about her, something that didn't belong. He squinted, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Was she human? No, she couldn't be. The shape of her limbs was wrong, too long, too precise. The way she moved, or rather didn't move, set something off in Kai's mind. He had seen plenty of alien species, and yet this one was unlike anything he could recognize. Instinctively, his hand tightened around the grip of his sidearm. He didn't know who or what this was, but one thing was certain. He needed answers. This planet, the wreckage of his ship, this strange figure. There were too many questions piling up, each one more unsettling than the last. Hello? His voice cut through the oppressive silence. It felt absurd, his words lost in the vast emptiness. But he had no other choice. There was nowhere else to turn. He couldn't stay stranded in this godforsaken place. The figure didn't move. Kai took a cautious step forward, then another, keeping his eyes fixed on her. His heart hammered in his chest as he closed the distance, the sound of his footsteps too loud against the backdrop of absolute quiet. The air felt thick, as though it were pressing against him, making each breath a struggle. And then, just as he thought he might have been imagining it, the figure spoke, her voice low, rich, and somehow ancient. You shouldn't be here. The words sent a shiver down his spine, and for the briefest of moments, his instincts screamed at him to run. But curiosity, ever his downfall, rooted him to the spot. He had to know who she was, what she was. I didn't have a choice, he said, his voice steadier than he felt. I crash-landed here. I need help. For a long moment she didn't answer. Her gaze locked onto him with an intensity that sent prickles of unease crawling up his back. Her eyes were black, so dark they seemed to swallow the light around them, unyielding, calculating. You should have stayed away, she said again, her voice colder now. You've made a mistake. One you won't survive. Kai's grip tightened on his weapon, though he wasn't sure why. Her words weren't a threat, not yet. But something in her tone, something in the way she stood there towering over him with an air of finality, made the hairs on the back of his neck stand at attention. I don't plan on dying here, he said. I don't plan on dying at all. She tilted her head slightly, as if amused by his defiance. You're not the one who needs to worry about dying. Her lips curled, a strange, knowing smile that only deepened the mystery. What's your name? Kai asked, his curiosity now completely piqued. He had no idea what kind of alien she was, but the fact that she was so calm, so detached, only made her all the more dangerous. The smile didn't fade, but her eyes darkened. I am Jalara. Kai's blood ran cold. The name sent a jolt of recognition through him. Jalara, the Valkyrian. The name that had been whispered through the galactic underworld for years. A name that instilled fear in the hearts of even the most seasoned warriors. Jalara, the untouchable. Kai took a slow, deliberate breath. He hadn't just landed on any random planet. He had crashed onto her world, the world of one of the most feared and revered warriors in the entire galaxy. And now, He was standing face to face with her, the woman who had killed countless enemies without breaking a sweat. This was bad. Worse than bad. This was a death sentence. But there was something about her, something in her eyes, that told him the story wasn't over yet. Not for him, not for her. There was more to this encounter than just survival. There was a mystery here, and if Kai had learned anything from his reckless adventures, it was this. Mysteries were far more dangerous than any enemy could ever be, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure if he was ready for the truth. The silence between Kai Donovan and Jalara stretched longer than it should have, like a taut string pulled to its breaking point. Her name, Valkyrian. It lingered in his mind, an echo that grew louder with each passing second. He had heard the stories, the legends, whispers of a warrior so skilled, so untouchable, that entire fleets trembled at the thought of crossing her path. But to be standing before her, alive, that was the real mystery. Kai kept his eyes fixed on her. He couldn't afford to look away. Not now. The dark, endless abyss of her gaze felt like it could swallow him whole, and yet there was something else there, a flicker of curiosity, maybe even interest. It unsettled him more than he cared to admit. "You're the Valkyrian," he said again, though it was more of a statement than a question. "The one they call unstoppable." Jalara's expression didn't change. She didn't confirm nor deny, but there was something in her stance, something imperceptible, that made his chest tighten. She was studying him, every inch, every breath. And then finally she spoke, her voice like the wind cutting through a desert, sharp and cold. "Your kind has been foolish to come here." Kai clenched his jaw, resisting the urge to snap back. His heart raced as the weight of her words sank in. What kind of planet was this? What kind of being was she? And why hadn't anyone told him about this place before? "I didn't have a choice," Kai said, his voice steady but laced with frustration. "I'm stranded. My ship's gone. And unless you plan on offering me a ride home, I'll need a way off this rock." The silence returned, heavy and suffocating. Jalara didn't answer immediately, but the corner of her mouth twitched, like she was amused by his insistence. The tension between them was palpable, the air around them thick with something unspoken. Her gaze never wavered. "You will die here," she said at last, each word wrapped in finality. Kai took a step back, feeling a chill crawl up his spine. He didn't know if she was warning him, threatening him, or simply stating a fact, but the intensity in her voice was enough to make him reconsider every choice that had brought him to this moment. "I'm not dying today," Kai said, more to convince himself than her. "Not without a fight." Jalara's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, a hint of something resembling a smile touched her lips. It wasn't kind. It wasn't friendly. It was something far darker, something that made Kai's instincts scream at him to turn and run as fast as he could. "You think you can fight me?" she asked, her voice laced with a challenge that was both terrifying and intriguing. "Do you know who I am?" Kai swallowed, his throat dry. He didn't answer. What was there to say? She had already made it clear who she was, the Valkyrian, the untouchable warrior. But he wasn't the type to back down from a challenge, especially not one that came wrapped in mystery. He was here now on her turf, and no matter how dangerous she was, he wasn't going to be intimidated. Not yet. "I don't know what your game is," he said, his voice firmer this time, "but I'm not here to fight. I just need to survive." A brief flicker of surprise flashed in her eyes, but it was gone so quickly that Kai wondered if he had imagined it. The moment stretched between them like a drawn bowstring, poised and dangerous. Then, without warning, Jalara stepped back, the sudden movement making him tense. For the first time, she looked away from him, turning her attention to the horizon beyond the jagged rocks. "There is a reason I live alone," she said, her voice softer but still laden with an unspoken weight. "And you've just stepped into it." Kai's pulse quickened as he took another step forward. "What do you mean?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, She walked toward one of the nearby rock formations, her long, graceful movements betraying an almost predatory grace. For a moment, Kai wondered if she was even aware of the danger she posed, or if this was all part of the test. She stopped in front of a narrow entrance hidden among the rocks, her back to him. "You'll find your way inside. There's a storm coming. You won't survive out here." Kai's brow furrowed. A storm? But before he could ask more, a low rumble shook the ground beneath him. The skies darkened, and thick clouds, swirling with an unnatural intensity, began to roll in from the horizon. The air grew heavier, thick with the promise of something more than just a storm. Jalara turned back to him, her eyes glinting in the murky light. "You'll understand soon enough." The wind picked up, howling through the narrow gorge with a deafening force. Kai hesitated for only a second, then followed her into the entrance without a word. The storm was close now, and there was no sense in arguing. But as he passed her, he caught the faintest smell. A scent that didn't belong to any plant, any animal, or even the harsh rock of the planet. It was sharp, metallic, familiar, but strange. Inside, the cave was dimly lit by bioluminescent moss clinging to the walls. The air was cool, not quite cold, but it carried a weight to it, a strange, almost magnetic pull that tugged at Kai's senses. Jalara moved silently ahead, her figure blending with the darkness as she led him deeper into the cavern. "Why did you save me?" Kai asked, the question slipping from his lips before he could stop it. "You don't strike me as the charitable type." Jalara didn't turn, but her voice was clear in the stillness. "You weren't meant to die today, not by my hand." Kai frowned. "Then why warn me?" "Because you're not the only one stranded here," she said, her tone cold, but layered with something else, something he couldn't quite place. The air grew heavier still, and Kai felt it, a deep, gnawing sense of unease crawling down his spine. His eyes darted to the shadows that flickered along the cave walls, his instincts screaming that something wasn't right. Before he could ask another question, a shriek pierced the air, so high and shrill it rattled his bones. The sound was unlike anything he'd ever heard, a creature's cry, distorted and twisted by the storm outside. And then he saw them. Figures, dark, hulking shapes, moving swiftly through the shadows, closing in on them. Kai's hand went instinctively to his sidearm. "You said you weren't the only one stranded here," he said, his heart racing. "Who are they?" Jalara's lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't one of kindness. "The ones who came to finish what they started." And just like that, Kai realized the true depth of his mistake. The storm was the least of his problems now. The cave's atmosphere grew thick with an unnatural tension, the kind that ripples through the air before the storm breaks. The dark shapes emerged from the shadows, their forms too massive, too distorted to be anything familiar. Kai's heart thundered in his chest as he tightened his grip on the weapon, his breath shallow, eyes darting between the figures and Jalara, who stood at the front, unshaken. The creatures moved closer, their unnatural shrieks cutting through the tense silence, like blades through glass. The air crackled with static, the storm outside making it impossible to tell where the sound ended and where their presence began. "Who are they?" Kai demanded, his voice strained but sharp. Jalara's eyes narrowed, locking on the approaching shapes, her gaze almost detached. "Mercenaries," she said, as if it was a fact as simple as the sky was blue. "Hired to hunt down anyone who dares oppose their employers." Kai's pulse quickened. "And who hired them?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, her hands moved with a practiced fluidity, fingers brushing the hilt of a weapon concealed under the folds of her armor. The deep metallic sound of it sliding free echoed through the cave, a cold, unforgiving sound. "Someone who knows you're here," she said, her voice quiet, but filled with a dark finality. "And they won't stop until they have both of us." For the first time, Kai saw something in her eyes that wasn't calculated, a flicker of something human, perhaps, or was it a hint of doubt? Whatever it was, it sent a chill crawling down his spine. The figures closed the gap between them, stepping into the dim light cast by the bioluminescent moss. They were monstrous, large, armored humanoids with eyes glowing a sickly green, their bodies covered in scarred, battle-worn armor. Their movements were unnatural, too fast, too deliberate, like predators tracking their prey. Kai's breath caught in his throat as the realization hit him. These weren't just mercenaries. They were something more, something different, engineered for destruction. "Stay close," Jalara warned, her voice like a whip cracking through the tension. "And whatever you do, don't try to fight them." A knot of frustration twisted in Kai's gut. Why not? He couldn't understand it. His pulse was already racing, the adrenaline surging through him. If he didn't fight, if he didn't stand his ground, what was the point of being here at all? "You'll die," Jalara said bluntly, her gaze flicking to the creatures, then back to him. "You don't know what they are. They were engineered to hunt Valkyrians. And you—" She paused, her lips curling into a rare, grim smile. "You're nothing but a distraction to them." The first of the mercenaries lunged, a blur of motion that sent a wave of tension crashing over Kai. He instinctively raised his weapon, but before he could fire, Jalara moved. It was a blur of grace and lethal precision, a dance of death. In an instant she was upon the creature, her blade flashing in the low light as she sliced through its armor like paper. The mercenary dropped to the ground with a guttural screech, its body crumpling in a heap. Kai stared in awe. He had seen deadly fighters before. He had faced his own fair share of enemies. But nothing like this. Jalara was a force of nature, a predator, a storm made flesh. But even as the first mercenary fell, Kai knew it was only a matter of time before more arrived. He had no illusions about his survival if this continued. More figures emerged from the shadows, their eyes burning brighter as the storm outside seemed to heighten in intensity. The tension in the cave was suffocating, as if the walls themselves were closing in. And Jalara, she wasn't even winded. She was moving like she was born for this, each strike a study in lethal efficiency. "How many more of them are there?" Kai shouted over the din of clashing weapons. "Too many," Jalara answered, her voice calm, almost too calm, "but not enough to stop me." The ground trembled beneath them as a massive, hulking figure emerged from the depths of the cave. This one was unlike the others, larger, more imposing, its armor a gleaming black that seemed to swallow the light. Its eyes were two burning orbs of crimson, and it moved with a terrifying certainty. Kai's heart dropped into his stomach. "That one's different," he whispered, dread pooling in his chest. Jalara's expression shifted slightly. She took a step back, her stance defensive. "That's the leader." "Great," Kai muttered under his breath. Without warning, the leader lunged at Jalara with terrifying speed. She barely dodged in time, but Kai saw the flicker of surprise in her eyes. This one was faster, stronger than the rest. It wasn't just another mercenary, it was something else, something more. Jalara parried a strike, her blade clashing against the leader's, sending sparks flying through the dim cave. The force of the impact reverberated in the air, and Kai felt the weight of the moment settle over him. He was here now, and there was no going back. Without thinking, Kai ran toward the fight, his instincts screaming at him to help, to do something. He wasn't a soldier, he wasn't a warrior, but in this moment, he had no choice. Jalara had saved him once. Maybe he could return the favor. As he closed the gap, the leader turned its gaze to him, and in that instant everything changed. Its eyes locked with his, and Kai felt a jolt of recognition, an ancient, primal awareness. The thing was not just hunting them, it was testing them. "Stay back!" Jalara shouted, but it was too late. The leader's massive arm swung around, knocking Kai to the ground with a force that stole the air from his lungs. His head slammed into the cave floor, and everything went black for a moment. When Kai came to, the world was a blur, his body aching from the impact. But there was no time to dwell on the pain. He scrambled to his feet, his weapon a distant thought, and saw the leader looming over Jalara. Something inside him snapped. The cave trembled again, louder this time. A low hum, distant but growing closer, filled the air. A warning, a call. The ground beneath them split open. Jalara's expression hardened as she turned to Kai, her voice urgent. "The storm is not the only thing you need to worry about." Before he could respond, the earth buckled beneath their feet. The dark abyss of the planet's secrets was about to reveal itself, and in the chaos, everything Kai thought he knew, everything he thought was real, was about to shatter. In that moment, Kai understood. The true battle wasn't just with the mercenaries or Jalara's past. It was something far older, more dangerous, and far more terrifying than either of them could have imagined. And the storm wasn't even close to being finished. The ground rumbled beneath Kai's feet, shaking with a force that felt like the world was cracking open around him. He staggered to his feet, blinking away the fog in his mind as the dust settled around him. The leader of the mercenaries, towering and relentless, loomed overhead. Its red eyes burned with a malevolent gleam, a hunter's gaze that pierced through the chaos. Jalara stood a few paces away, her breathing slow but measured, her weapon poised, but Kai saw the strain in her movements. She was tiring, and so was he. The storm outside seemed to reach a crescendo, its fury reflected in the cave's trembling walls. But the real storm, the one Kai hadn't anticipated, was the storm that had just erupted inside him. A strange deepening knot twisted in his gut as the realization hit. Jalara wasn't just fighting to survive, she was protecting something. Protecting him. "Stay back," she said again, her voice sharp, commanding, but laced with a layer of urgency that hadn't been there before. "I can't," Kai muttered under his breath. His legs trembled, his pulse hammered against his chest. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to run, to leave her behind and flee. But something else, something primal, anchored him in place. He owed her, and the storm wasn't done with them yet. The mercenary leader's fist slammed into the ground, sending a shockwave of energy through the cave. Jalara leapt, her blade cutting through the air in a silver arc, but the leader was faster. It caught her wrist mid-strike, its grip like iron, unyielding. Jalara grimaced, her teeth gritting against the pressure, but she didn't falter. She never did. Kai's breath caught in his throat. He wasn't sure what drove him forward, desperation, a fleeting sense of duty, or the fear of watching her fall. Either way, he pushed himself to his feet, forcing his legs to carry him toward the chaos. "Jalara!" he shouted, voice hoarse with panic. She looked at him then, her gaze sharp but distant, as if she was already calculating her next move, the next sacrifice she might have to make. "Don't be a fool," she snapped, her voice cold despite the tension. "You don't understand what's at stake." But Kai couldn't understand. He didn't understand. He didn't understand why they were here, why the storm was still raging, why he was being dragged into this web of violence and secrecy. But what he did understand, with an unsettling clarity, was that she was all that stood between him and death. And she couldn't do it alone. He reached for the weapon at his side, his fingers slick with sweat, but before he could get a proper grip, the ground beneath him gave way. The cavern floor cracked, splintering into jagged, uneven shards, and Kai found himself tumbling into the dark. He had no time to scream. The fall was brief, and he crashed into the cave floor below with a sickening thud, his body sprawling out across the stone like a rag doll. Stars exploded behind his eyes, and for a moment he couldn't remember where he was or why he was there. His pulse throbbed in his ears, drowning out all but the rush of blood in his head. Slowly, he pushed himself upright, groaning as the sharp pains in his limbs made themselves known. His chest burned, his mouth dry. But there was no time to recover. The air was thick, and the atmosphere had changed. He could feel it, deep in his bones. A low growl reverberated through the cavern. Kai's heart skipped a beat. Through the haze of pain and confusion, he saw them. The others. They were rising from the shadows of the cave, their eyes glowing with an eerie, sickly green light. Their movements were fluid, Inhuman. More mercenaries, more of them. The leader had sent them after him, but this time they weren't going to stop until he was nothing but dust. And he was alone. "Kai!" Jalara's voice echoed from above, but it was too late. She had vanished into the storm above, lost to the chaos. He wouldn't let this be the end. He gritted his teeth, struggling to push himself to his feet, but his legs wavered beneath him. His vision swam, and the weight of the situation settled like a boulder on his chest. The mercenaries were closing in, their eyes fixed on him. They were predators. He was the prey. In that instant, the full scope of the situation came crashing down on him. The storm, the mercenaries, the leader, all of it was connected, bound by something far deeper, darker than he had ever anticipated. He wasn't just trapped in a fight for survival. He was being drawn into something else entirely. He could feel it deep within him, a whisper of something ancient, something dangerous. And Jalara had known it from the start. She had known the stakes, the price of his involvement in this fight, and still she had dragged him into it. Kai gritted his teeth, and against all reason, against all logic, he took a step forward. The mercenaries moved in unison, their weapons raised, but Kai was done running. He wasn't sure what was driving him now. Was it the need to protect Jalara? Or was it the realization that this wasn't just a battle for survival, but a battle for answers? His hand closed around the hilt of his weapon. "I'm not finished," he muttered under his breath. With a scream that tore from his throat, he lunged forward, the weapon a blur of metal in his hands. The first mercenary fell with a guttural howl, its body crumpling under the weight of Kai's strike. But there were more, always more. And with every swing of his blade, with every strike, he knew. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The sound of a crackling energy shield met his ears. Through the thick veil of dust and smoke, he saw Jalara, her eyes locked onto his, her figure looming above him like an ethereal guardian. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. Everything hung in the balance. And then, Jalara spoke, her voice just loud enough for him to hear over the chaos. "You're here for a reason, Kai. There's no turning back now." His heart stilled. There it was, the truth he had been waiting for, and the truth that would change everything. The storm outside roared, louder than ever, and in that moment, Kai understood. The war wasn't over. Not by a long shot, but at least he was no longer alone. The silence in the cavern was deafening, the oppressive weight of it pressing down on Kai's chest like 1,000 tons of stone. His breath came in shallow gasps, his hands trembling, coated with blood, his own and that of the mercenaries he'd slain. The air was thick with the scent of metal and earth, and the storm outside still howled, its fury unrelenting. But the battle was over. Kai's gaze lifted slowly, the world around him spinning. His vision swam, black edges creeping at the corners of his eyes, but his focus remained fixed. There, standing in the dim light of the cave's entrance, Jalara watched him with those piercing, knowing eyes. She was covered in the same blood and grime, her clothes torn, but there was no sign of fatigue in her movements. She was a force, a storm in her own right. "You did it," she said quietly, almost with reverence, as though she were speaking not to the man who had fought alongside her, but to something deeper, something stronger, something she had always known he could become. Kai tried to steady himself, using the rock beside him for support, but his legs felt like jelly. Every muscle screamed in protest, his body refusing to obey the commands of his mind. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. His eyes scanned the wreckage of the battlefield, the bodies of the mercenaries scattered like discarded puppets, their once mighty forms reduced to nothing. The leader, the one who had been the catalyst for all of this, lay in a crumpled heap at the edge of the cavern, lifeless. And yet, despite the calm that had descended upon them, Kai couldn't shake the feeling that something was still amiss. He didn't know what it was, but he knew it was there, lingering in the air, just beyond his reach. "Jalara," he finally rasped, his voice hoarse. "What the hell just happened?" His gaze swept over the bodies, the broken equipment, the remains of the weapons that had only moments ago been wielded with such deadly intent. What were they after? Jalara stepped forward, her presence commanding, the faintest trace of uncertainty flickering in her gaze. "I knew you'd ask," she said, a note of resignation in her tone. She hesitated for just a moment, as though debating how much to reveal. "They were looking for you, Kai. You've been a target since the beginning." A chill ran through him at the words, the truth in them settling deep in his gut like ice. "Me?" His voice cracked with disbelief. "Why? What do they want with me?" Her eyes softened, her guard dropping for the first time since they had met. "You've been chosen. By them. By the people who've been pulling the strings all along. This war, it was never about the mercenaries. It was about you." His mind raced, the pieces of the puzzle he hadn't even known existed finally beginning to fall into place. But it wasn't enough. He still didn't understand. "Who are they?" Kai demanded, the words burning in his throat. "Who are you?" Jalara exhaled slowly, as if the weight of her secrets were finally becoming too much to bear. She stepped closer to him, the distance between them closing. "I'm part of an ancient order, a group tasked with protecting certain individuals who hold a key to a power far older than anything you can imagine. You were born for this, Kai. For this war." Kai shook his head, disbelief fighting with the overwhelming sense of truth that clung to her words. "What do you mean? I'm just a guy, a soldier. I didn't ask for any of this." Jalara's eyes locked onto his, her gaze intense. "None of us ask for it, but sometimes we're chosen regardless of our desire. The mercenaries, the storm, the danger. It was all meant to pull you into this. You've been on the edge of a larger conflict, one that you couldn't have possibly understood until now." He stared at her, his pulse thundering in his ears. "And you? What's your role in all of this?" "I was sent to protect you," she replied, her voice steady, but the weight of her words settled heavily between them. "At all costs." Kai stepped back, his breath catching in his throat as a new realization took root. He looked around the cave, seeing it now for what it truly was, a battleground, a place of destruction, but also a place of answers. But why me? What's so special about me?